So respectfully, would it come as a surprise to you that people don't think you have that kind of respect for police?
No, I don't. I know how police officers feel about me, but I cover public safety. These are the assignments I'm given. It's not going to stop me from doing it. I'm not anti-police. A lot of my best story ideas on your department come from other guys in your agency. This is a chief, we've highlighted the times where he'll show up at a scene and say something that later turns out to not be true. Sometimes they send out a corrected version, sometimes they don't. And we're talking about situations where people are killed by police. And it's very important to either say nothing at all until you know the facts, or what you're saying to the media, which is then going to turn around and trumpet that to the public, it should be accurate information.
Why do y'all take any statement at any kind of value from Act 4SA regarding police action?
Blu Wolf Podcast.
This episode of the Blu Wolf Podcast is brought to you by Blue Line Professional Inspections. Check out blproinspections.com or call 210-771-8831 for all your inspection needs, including home inspection, wood-destroying insect inspection, sewer drain inspection, and on-site water treatment inspection. Blue Line is a first responder-owned business.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Blu Wolf Podcast. I'm Willie Cantu. We are on a roll with our topics and guests that we've been having lately. As one of the new compliments that we get from a lot of the listeners is that we're mixing things up. When I started this podcast, I didn't know where it was going to take me. Obviously, because I'm a retired police officer, I was going to talk about police action, mainly tactics and bad tactics, obviously, which sell a lot, and then good tactics if they were warranted and all that. But since then, it just kind of expanded. And I always believe that if you do the right thing, then good things will come out of that. And maybe I'm saying the right thing, I don't know. But it's good to know. I brought in my colleague here, David Sapansky, and that was one of the best things I could have done, because there's a whole nother perspective, and I think he's a lot more articulate than I am. He's smarter than I am, that's for sure. But we grew up the same way in the police department. And as you know, if you've been watching, we've gotten, and if you haven't, please watch the other ones, but we've talked to mayoral candidates. We've talked to Javier Peña, retired DEA agent who took down Pablo Escobar. We'll mix it up. And if sometimes people reach out to us, or most of the time we reach out to them. But today we have a special guest here, Mr. Dillon Collier from KSAT-12 News. And this is, I'm telling you, this is one that David actually reached out to you.
Yep.
And out of the blue, because David, he has more time than I do, because I have young kids to think about certain things about the podcast, and I'm grateful for it, because he does take care of a lot of the, I'd say, the administrative stuff, especially with things like this. But reached out and he said that you had to ask your producers, and I was like, well, I don't think that's going to happen. I really, I'm a pessimist at heart anyway. So, but when you came back pretty quickly and said, yeah, and agreed, that got me excited that we're going to have I think a pretty good conversation with you.
Yeah, I hope so.
I just want to thank you too, Dillon. I really do. I appreciate you coming on. In our conversation, our brief conversation, I said we don't always agree on a lot, sometimes very little, but to have a conversation, to come in and talk to a couple of retired cops says a lot about you. And I will qualify this because we plan on covering a lot of ground, and I was a captain, so it means I was part of the administration. And I do think it's important to acknowledge there are people in law enforcement that do things that deserve to be fired. It just, people have to be able to sustain that fireman, defend those firings in an arbitration or whatever that case is. There's also people that deserve to make bad decisions that deserve to be disciplined, and we acknowledge that too. I don't know if all of them need to be on KSAT-12, but that's a whole nother conversation. So you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, I'm Dillon Collier. I'm an investigative reporter at KSAT-12. We're the ABC affiliate here in San Antonio. I've been there since 2016. I was in a similar role at KINS 5 up the hill on Fredericksburg for 4 years, from 2012 to 2016. I worked in Flint, Michigan for 5 years before that. And then my first TV job was in Laredo, which is a tiny television market. Born and raised in Arizona, went to Arizona State, got a journalism degree from the Cronkite School at ASU.
So why not football? Because one of your, it's a bio of some sort in one of the write-ups on you that you were like a high school kicker. Or...
I was all-state, yeah.
Were you?
Punter my
Okay.
senior year,
Oh,
yeah.
cool.
It's one of those, and my daughter, we're kind of going through it right now with her soccer. It's, do you take an academic scholarship, a stipend, or do you go to a smaller school that maybe doesn't necessarily have your major just so you can continue playing the sport? And I chose to take a scholarship and get a stipend and go to ASU, an in-state school. Looking back on it, though, I probably should have continued to play football and gone to a smaller school, which is
Really?
kind of the advice I'm giving her in terms of soccer. Is, yeah, I mean, you miss it as soon as it's gone. I'm in college wishing I was still playing, so one of those things you kind of
That's
look
a good
back
thing that
on.
parents can get, right? Perspective and a little insight and give it forward. So you're being humble, right? You're an Emmy Award-winning journalist, right?
I am, yeah.
And you're a two-time winner of the Houston Press Club Journalist of the Year, right? 2014, 2018.
Got a lot of trophies.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's good. I mean, that's what you want to do, right? So, no, we want to definitely acknowledge your accomplishments. So.
My oldest sister was in art, radio, television. That's her base. So
Okay.
she's been mostly radio, and she is just like that. Certain places she's gone because you say.
And one of the articles that says that you started your nomadic.
Yeah,
Trek,
you bounce
you know?
around, and
Yeah.
it's tough to it's very hard to start in a market this size. San Antonio is a huge city. You see it a little bit nowadays. They tend to hire.
It's still considered a mid-market, though, right? Like compared to all the bigger markets, like we've seen a lot of.
It's not like a Dallas or a Houston, but it's growing. It's a top 30 market. So there's around 200 in the United States, and it's in the top 30. It'd be much higher if we had a bigger suburb than New Braunfels. I mean, that's the next largest city in our DMA.
Right.
If we had, like a Fort Worth compared to a Dallas, that's what makes the Dallas market so big, is you have these huge enclaves up there.
No, for sure. I mean, San Antonio's growing leaps and bounds. You never know what's going to happen, right? Like someone said we're one of the fastest growing cities in the country at the moment. So,
Yeah.
So you say you have a daughter. She's how old?
Tessa is, she'll be 14 in a couple weeks.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, she's in 8th grade. She'll be a freshman next year. Married. My wife, she was a longtime journalist, and she got
She was
out.
an anchor, right?
She was a news anchor, yeah, at KINS 5. Had worked in Flint with me, Corpus Christi and Laredo, and she now she's the head of communications for one of the school districts on the south side, which she loves.
Okay. She moved on at a journalism. Well, she's still kind of involved.
Yeah. She's sort of on the other side of it now. She also is the head of their foundation, so stays pretty busy.
probably gives her a little more mom time too.
Yeah, a little more flexibility. She was always stuck on the overnight shift, which in TV news it's rough. Even having to fill in on that, you're kind of sleeping for a few hours during the day. Your alarm goes off at 2 a.m. I mean, it's just sort of a rough way to live. I mean, you guys know it,
police
with
officers
like
no
the
different.
dog.
They work
Inside the
overnight.
building.
Yeah, I mean,
firemen too. you
Yeah,
know,
it's
by the way.
it wears on you after a while.
Sure does. Yeah, absolutely.
So you're part of the investigators. Is it the unit called investigators or
We rebranded a few years ago from the Defenders to just KSAT Investigates. To kind of, it helps with script writing and and I cover a number of topics. Public safety is one of them. We do a lot of stories on some of the mishappenings in school districts, cities as well. Not all stories I do on San Antonio are about SAPD. We do a lot in sort of the suburbs. I've done a whole series on the Medina County Sheriff's Office, some of the issues they have out there.
We did some on Windcrest not too long.
Windcrest, we've got another one coming out in a couple weeks. Yeah, so
Former San Antonio police officer.
Jimmy Cole. Yeah.
And then we know that you've done some stories in New Braunfels on some SAPD guys. We know that there is no shortage of giving you things to talk about, right?
Yeah. And that sort of I guess, comes with the territory when you're a large organization. You have, well over 2,000 officers. Things happen, and some of it makes
people, and sometimes they make bad decisions. We wanted to open with that. That's why I wanted to open with that. I had a quote here. This was from the KSAT news director, but I don't know if she's still the KSAT news director. It was somebody named Bernice Carney.
She left KSAT a few years ago and has since retired.
Yeah, well, I thought this was interesting. She said, "Truth matters. Dillon is a journalist who has demonstrated throughout his entire career that holding truth to power is in the best interest of all of us." And I couldn't agree more. I really do. I couldn't agree more. But the truth has to be the truth, right? I mean, sometimes it can be skewed a little bit. And the reason I'm going there just a little bit early is because when we're going to talk about some of the stories that seem to come out, and we talk off camera, right? You're okay with this, right? And so, it just seems like the KSAT version or y'all's version, yours or somebody else, is always like, yes, this guy got his job back, but he still did all this. And then it seems like they're always talking about the loopholes of why they're getting their job back. And we won't do this now, but at some point in this podcast, I'd like to talk a little bit about the arbitration process,
Sure.
the contract and negotiations, the city, the union, and then voting or endorsing it or ratifying it by the membership.
Yeah.
And just so that people really understand that it's not the police department that is dictating this, it's the processes that were agreed on by both entities.
Right.
Okay, I just wanted to talk about that.
I mean, we could use an example. Thomas Villarreal, he was reinstated not that long ago. One of the allegations is that he went into a man's home that he had tried to do a traffic stop on. It then became a felony case, so he was allowed to go into his home. One of the allegations is that he used too much force in effecting the arrest. I've seen the footage. He continued to punch that man in the face repeatedly in the doorway of his own home. So if we report that in a story, I don't know how you can really dispute that.
Have you seen all of the body cams? Because Willie worked on that case and was part of the defense team.
No, we saw what was played at arbitration and what was played in, the court hearings surrounding the criminal.
No, I understand. Sometimes things look really, really awful, but at the end of the day, sometimes they're just lawful.
That can be a podcast in and of itself.
Yeah.
To talk about. And like David said, so I work as an expert with the Hood Norton group to defend only officers
Yeah.
that are getting indicted. And of course, we could have a whole nother podcast about DA Gonzalez, with what he's doing. And I have to call this out because you said it, and it's happening now with what's going on with this illegal that was sent to El Salvador. Their
Abrego Garcia.
Kilmar, whatever his name is, and I understand the journalism that's involved and how the rhetoric matters. Like you said about this guy with Thomas Villarreal, a man. Yes, he is a man. That is his gender. The dude was a federal felon. He was on federal supervised release that night, who was violating probably the top 5 tenets of what he, of his conditions.
Right.
He was DWI. He had cocaine in his system. Which they couldn't really get him on evading arrest in the vehicle. But if you watch all the videos like I did, I saw everybody's body cam. He was evading in the vehicle. He was more eluding.
He was trying to get home.
He was trying to get away and out of sight from those guys. Because, we went through this a million times. Once they spot you, and a guy like him who's a seasoned crook, he's got his head on a swivel. He's like an owl. He could look behind him.
Yeah.
And they can spot the heat. They're good crooks. So he was trying to elude them, then he gets there. And they have legitimate, probable cause, lawful
Right.
probable cause to do that, but then he walks away. I believe, and not to make this too long, I truly believe he had, when he got into the house, he had more on him, either narcotics and a weapon, or a weapon that he gave to his father. Because if you watch the videos, he speaks to somebody as he's holding the door. He's calling out to his dad, and then he's speaking to somebody. When they finally get in, dad's not there. So they do what they do. And the other thing is, what people view as what might be excessive. Now, there's a difference between and you saw Thomas. Thomas is a pretty good sized guy.
Yeah.
Did you see Carlos?
Mm-hmm.
He's a pretty good sized guy too.
Yeah.
So when they hit people, they're a little bit stronger.
They
You know
do
what I mean?
damage.
Yeah, they do damage. You know what I mean? Now, our rules, I believe, we are justified in using force, like punches and things like that. They tried to tase him, which is part of that as well. That as long as we don't overdo it. Once they got him in handcuffs, you don't continue to hit him, anymore, because there's a policy against hitting handcuff people and stuff like that.
As there should be.
As there should be, 100%. When they got him up from that, I was very impressed, for one, as a police officer too, and being around those situations. There was no more motherfucking him. They didn't walk him out and bang him into the wall and stuff like
Yank
that.
his arms up.
Yeah, everything was over at that point, But that's what I'm saying. You called him a man. Yes, he is a man, but he was also a federal felon. At the time he had, and being on federal supervised release means that you it's in lieu of being in federal prison.
Right.
And so this dude is supposed to act like he's inside there with the freedoms to be able to move around like he does, and he's violating already.
But certainly not the freedom to commit crimes and to continue.
No, not at all.
Possessing
I
drugs.
just make a distinction here because I know it doesn't really get looked. I think you guys touched on it a bit previously for murder. When he says he's on federal supervised release, that's not for the murder. We try people for murder on state charges. So we're talking about a criminal, it was demonstrated violence in the past. And so we're not trying to try the case. I get it. It looked ugly, right? But when you guys are talking about it, and I don't even know if it was your story, they said, okay, the judge gave him back his job, and the arbitrator came in. It was a mistrial, and the arbitrator said, hey, look, yeah, we do believe that these guys shouldn't have went in there, and there was a use of force. But because McManus can't justify, I remember the conversation from the initial 14-day statement to an indefinite. And so I was going to get into this a little bit later, but have you guys ever thought to do a story now, because you have this one and you had Vargas not too long ago, right? He got $300,000, right? He got $300,000 back. He's going to get probably closer to $350,000 to $400,000.
I mean, he's been out 5 years.
Right. So we're talking a lot of money,
sum.
right? And so has anyone ever thought to say, okay, rather than, because I think I got a piece, right? Let me find it because it's important for me to say this, and it's from, you guys go to somebody from Act SA somewhere.
Act for SA.
Act for SA, which used to be part of used to be part of the fixed SAPD team, right? And proposition. This is what this woman said. These are the kind of decisions why the public continues to lose trust in our system. Okay, that's an opinion. I don't disagree with that, right? And then she also says, this is not the type of, this is what the chief said, this is not the type of officer I want on the force. My question is, why is no one asking, why can't he defend or sustain his discipline? It doesn't seem like anybody's always saying, man, the chief is not in a position to go back and say, this is why I remember exactly that conversation. This is why I went from 15 to this. There have been, at one point in your, going back now, I think you guys go back to 2020 with the Blue story. You were saying that 2/3 of the individuals are winning their cases back. Now we're going back 5 years, right?
The Broken Blue story.
2/3 of the officers, or 62 point whatever percent, are winning their jobs back. But if they're winning their jobs back, one is because I think you interviewed Mike Kelly at the time. Mike says, look, oftentimes the chief will use his position to over-discipline. Now that's objective, right? You don't have to believe that. But what you have to believe is that because the chief is not doing a good professional job and not being able to sustain his decisions when it comes to an arbitration, he's not doing his job. And so there's smoke in the air. What happened in 2020 is just now revealing itself in 2025. Yeah. And when I say there's smoke in the air, there's a lot of it. That means there's a fire. There's a problem in the police department because he's had so many poor decisions that have cost the taxpayers millions of dollars. And I just can't really recall a time where you guys have said, hey, the chief isn't doing what he's supposed to do. We talked to Councilwoman Melissa Haverda, and I said, hey, she's the chairman of the Public Safety Committee, so she's a little bit more involved. They're not professional meetings. It doesn't come across as somebody that's at that level that can produce information and defend information.
Well, it just feels like he's not being briefed.
But who briefs him?
The rest of the administration around him. I mean, he's not alone in that
And
room with
puts
the officer.
Who puts those people in there?
I assume he chooses.
I'm going to give you the cliff notes, right? On all of these disciplinary hearings, what happens is the chief comes as a chief of staff. That was usually Bobby Blanton, who's a problem in himself. But now it's Michelle Ramos. And I don't care who he puts there. That's entirely the chief's prerogative. He comes in. There's a city attorney in there. There's a lawyer for the officer,
right.
And then there's the officer, and it's usually one other DC of that division and a captain. So I was in a lot of those meetings. As
Internal Affairs is not there?
Internal Affairs is not there at that time. They've already talked, but they have the file. Their
might be like a
investigation has been
witness.
concluded. Not in the disciplinary hearing. They're not there. And so what happens is the chief often comes in and says, okay, before he brings them in, they're sitting right outside, oftentimes for 30 to 45 minutes. Okay, somebody brief me on this. What do you mean somebody brief me on this?
Right.
You've had the file there. And he does the same thing when he goes to the arbitration area. He doesn't want to be bothered with the details, and we've asserted that.
Or he can't remember them.
Okay, well, you said that, but that's starting to look like it. But
that's I've been in the room when he said that. I don't remember the details, and then the arbitrator will use that in the award and say the chief could not recollect what.
Right, but we're talking about people's careers here.
Yeah, I agree.
And we're talking about blacklisting them, and we're talking about your station putting them on there, and not even talking about the ramifications of what that may or may not do to the officer's wife or husband, the parents of the officer, the coworkers, the children. And I'm not attacking you.
I'm aware of the impact that our stories have on the people that are featured in them. When we show the footage of a female officer punching a pregnant woman who's handcuffed in the back seat of a patrol vehicle, I know the impact that had on Montoya's life. That's not going to stop me from airing the footage, though.
It's not that. That's not even what I'm saying. I'm just saying that, but the impact is there, but because the chief is not taking the time, and you say, I can't remember. Dillon, I was on the police department 33 years. I was operational for much of that 33 years. I became a supervisor in 2003, a lieutenant in 2008, captain in 2012. I was on special ops teams. Narcotics has nothing to do with where I worked or not. My point is I made a lot of arrests in both federal and state court. I can remember those cases. Yeah. I can remember those cases, and I don't know why the chief doesn't have notes or could look at the file, talk to his chief of staff or the internal assistant to the chief of staff. I just say I call bullshit on that stuff because it is bullshit.
I would, if I was the chief of police and I was a key witness in any arbitration hearing for an officer who's trying to get an indefinite suspension overturned, I would do as much homework as possible, be briefed on what happened, because a lot of times it's been 3, 4, even 5 years. It feels like he comes in a little flat-footed sometimes, and the attorney for the officer always keys in on that. That if you can't remember the key details, why did you do it in the first place? And then a lot of times the arbitrator will cite that in the award.
And do you know why that is with him? He doesn't, because you would expect this from, just you're an employee of a professional organization. You have bosses who might, say they call you in for a meeting of some sort. They let's say it has to do with discipline. They should keep notes on what they talked about with you, right? Or nowadays you can record things, right, to keep it on there. And I have heard, and again, so I know Ben Cifuentes, and I know you've talked to him, and he's represents a lot of these officers in arbitration.
Yeah.
The chief doesn't keep notes. He comes in off the cuff and hopes that he remembers his stuff. And that's not professional to begin with. And like David's saying, that doesn't give, well, for one, I guess it benefits the police officer, right?
Yeah.
And which it has so far. But, and we said this with Melissa Haberda, that because he walks into these public safety meetings totally unprepared also, with the assistant city manager, Villa Gomez, answering questions that are fielded to him. And it makes him look like he doesn't know what he's doing, like she's running the show. They might as well say, hey, you dude, just go to the bathroom, go get some coffee, let her answer other questions. And that shouldn't be expected from a police chief in that respect. And what you said about not airing that video, I get it. We have cameras now, body cameras now, cameras in the car.
Rear in vehicle
right.
camera.
There's two. There's one in the front, one in the back. There's then you have
you have cameras here, you have a camera over here now.
Nowadays, we have all that, which is, one of the big things, and y'all talk about, is us being accountable for things. And we have councilmen and activists that scream for accountability. I get it. But who is more accountable nowadays with people that are roaming around with body cameras on,
Right.
that are recording every single, now not necessarily the verbiage, there's no sound until you activate it and it goes back 30 seconds. So you have this mute, which you don't hear what's going on and all that. But those things capture things. Now they don't capture everything, because if my camera's pointing this way and I'm looking this way, or I'm busy over here, which we kind of ran into in that Villarreal case. Even one of the detectives that was in the integrity unit was trying to say, well, look, they were going frame by frame by frame and stopping. Look, there's his hand. Why didn't you grab it? Well, I didn't see it.
In slow-mo.
Yeah, it's what you cannot do.
Right. Which is going to be an issue with Jack Harper, the detective. We did a story a couple months ago on that situation. I don't know how arbitration will play out. I don't even know if it'll get to that. Maybe he'll be reinstated before they ever go before the arbitrator. But that was a case very much built on slowed down footage. The IA sergeant didn't even have all the video when we interviewed Ben Cifuentes about that. So
that in itself is a problem.
Yeah. So based on the limited footage he then had to slow it down, and you're dissecting an officer's actions at night, very little light. It sounded like there was a lot of noise. Eagle was overhead. There was a canine on scene. So I think when you get to that point, and it's a use of force situation where other officers in similar situations have not been fired, I think it's setting up for one of those things where he'll probably get a
and
job
that kind
back.
of where that little lawful but awful statement comes from. But let me just circle back again, because I don't want to just for it to gloss over it. No police officer wants an officer, I don't know who she was, I don't know the case, but hit a pregnant woman in the stomach. Nobody wants that on the police department. No one wants that guy Luckers on the police department. And I want to talk about that case because I know on that Broken Blue you talked a little bit about the timelines, but we'll get to that. I think I'm getting out of sequence. But I'm never really sure because the city don't always keep good numbers, but there's 58 names on that wall down there of officers on the police department that gave their lives. None of us want anyone to disrespect what their sacrifice was. And so, we opened up, or at least I opened up, said there are people in the police department that need to be fired for bad misconduct. Others need to be punished or disciplined for bad decisions. So we're not at odds on that.
Yeah. I mean, no one's gone harder at the chief the past decade than I have. This is someone who's not a fan of the work I do.
I'll agree with that.
This is a chief, we've highlighted the times where he'll show up at a scene and say something that later turns out to not be true. Sometimes they send out a corrected version, sometimes they don't. And we're talking about situations where people are killed by police. Yes. And it's very important to either say nothing at all until you know the facts, or what you're saying to the media, which is then going to turn around and trumpet that to the public. It should be accurate information.
And that's one of his biggest faults, is that he sticks his foot in his mouth before he knows all the facts. And it's burned him before. There was a shooting with the marshals and Rope a few years back, and he listened to his sergeant
when there was video that he could have watched, and you can kind of tell even if you're asking a
police officer, you should know that he is not giving you everything you should know. You should be, if you're the top dog in law enforcement, you better be that sharp. Because I know that, he knows that.
And I was at that scene that day.
Right, but he should have known, and I don't see the harm, and I know you guys want your story, you want the details.
I'm actually of the mindset, I'd rather not hear, we're there, we have our own cameras, we gather footage, we can talk to witnesses on scene. I'm not a fan of broadcasting everything he says if we then have to go back and correct it later, and they're not, especially if they're not going to make him available for a follow-up
you're
interview.
You're a well-renowned, respected journalist, so you're okay if a chief of police says, hey, look, I can't give you that information because I don't know
There's
it.
too much going on at this point.
Give me a few hours and I'll let you know.
Yes.
But here's the other thing
we want to broadcast the truth. We don't want to broadcast something that I'm going to have to then go back in a few months when video comes out and refute. I mean, we're not in the business of doing that.
The other part of that is and it happens with, say, the stories that you do, is you have a lot of people that are ignorant to the process of, and in police work. I mean, that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
Of course, you have people that think they know
Everything we know because they watch CSI, all week or whatever. We get those people. But if you're sharp enough, and I believe, because you should be, and that's what y'all want, the citizens want.
I believe he and I are. We're supposed to be retired now,
So we don't use it so much anymore. You can decipher the information from everybody, and you can kind of figure out, well, okay, this doesn't make sense to me just yet. What I'm hearing from here, what I'm seeing here, what I'm hearing from over here, it doesn't fit yet. And like you say, I'm glad you said it, that you would rather him just kind of hold off and go, hey, let me figure out the facts, and then I'll have a briefing later on. That way you guys can get the better, story of it. But I believe, I don't know if he feels like he's pressured by the media to say that, or if he owes it to the citizens or whatever, because it's worse when you stick your foot in your mouth and there's that correction later, that comes out. And it also starts the process of the public opinion, and that's what kind of snowballs. You mentioned Thomas Villarreal and Carlos Castro. That was a George Floyd fallout, because we had a lot of incidents that happened from, right?
Michael Brewer, Andre Vargas, same thing.
Yes.
I agree that and I think they even referred him to the FBI, which was an unusual step, but as a result of kind of the political climate at that time.
And so there was an activist involved that was related to them that got this, because the story, without getting too far into it,
they were disciplined. He went back to work.
in that same unit. And then this guy, this activist, forget his name, Philip something, started, talking to people. Next thing you know, they put him on admin duty. Next thing you know, they're fired. And they were, their heads were spinning with all that. But Emily Eden of the Express News did like almost a 2-page story on this guy, a man that was beaten, and all this, and then even had pictures of the father looking, out. He had 2 felon sons at home that night, of which, what's his name? Wilson was
Wilson was the suspect,
threw at the officers, because he walked out of the doorway just as he got to the doorway. He threw them at the officers to distract him, and then he went inside. So again, that's just the way it was. But that's how the story went, and that started all the public opinion on these officers. And then, of course, 4 years later, 4.5 years later, everything comes out. For one, because of the ineptitude of the DA, it never even went to a verdict.
Which was a story my main coverage on Villarreal and Castro has been showing how the district attorney's office, the civil rights unit, messed up on this case. I mean, that's...
They did the same thing with Oscar Cruz.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't do the story on Villarreal's reinstatement. One of our other reporters did. I'm familiar with it, but
and the next
it's odd that would be the one to criticize, because, the main story our unit did on Villarreal and Castro was how, the prosecutor's office didn't handle it properly.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we're necessarily criticizing. What we're saying is, it seems like, I don't think a lot of police officers really have a problem with you guys presenting the facts. It just comes with the territory. An officer gets arrested, that's going to make the news. I just think sometimes it seems like the people that are doing it kind of like enjoy doing it. And it just never seems like that there's like when somebody is, like, I don't want to say completely exonerated, but sometimes they're exonerated, right? Sometimes somebody says, no, that didn't happen, right? And it doesn't seem like there's a lot of time spent like really walking it back, because those guys are now expected to come back and be productive members of a police department. Right. Not everybody can be put in a back office. Yeah. These guys are out on patrol again, and trying to get these guys re-engaged to do the right thing at the right time when it is needed most is what our end goal should be.
So there's a lot of news coverage when the original incident happens. It tends to be more flimsy when the criminal case is dismissed or they're reinstated.
I wanted to ask you this sooner. So y'all changed your names from defenders to investigators, and you explain why.
But when y'all were defenders, because y'all are still doing the same
Thing, right? What were y'all defenders
I
of?
have no idea. It was a name in place before I worked there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it always seemed. I think you do some consumer reporting, so maybe you're defending the person who's been ripped off by another member of the community, but I don't think it really fit the style of stories that our unit tends to do, so I was fine with the name change.
What do you know about the case law Graham versus Connor? Nothing. Okay. Have you ever researched it or
What is it?
Graham versus Connor?
It's the one that
Yeah.
justifies the state of mind of the officer at the time.
It comes off.
In every litigation of an officer's actions. And it is, so with Villarreal and Castro, the judge Rangel, who I like, he's been pretty fair. He would not allow us to mention the case, but we could mention the details and the tenets of it. And the reason he wouldn't was because that involved use of excessive force, but it was in a civil trial, not a criminal trial.
Which to me didn't make any sense. He's the judge, you know what I mean? But as long as he was able to let us talk about what is required. And number one, with police action, and I would suggest, that you check it out, because I think it would make a lot more sense to you about the actions of the police officers and what we're allowed to do. And what it is basically saying that the jurors, the people making judgments on the officer's fate, they must look
At the situation through the eyes of the officer at the time, based on the totality of the circumstances at the time. And
if you took like what we're seeing, or what I was telling you, they're going frame by frame by frame.
if you took that much time, of course, that's way later, you're still not given a fair assessment that the officer
No,
had.
I'm not a fan of when we're at arbitration and they slow down footage.
Yes.
Because that you've totally taken, not only were we not in the moment when it happened, but now you're taking that moment, projecting it onto a screen, and then doing a slowed down version of it. I mean, that's not a fair.
So when they did it in the trial, I'm like, is anybody going to say anything? That is not fair. And then we had a police officer,
Which we do have some of them.
a detective that was going along with it. Like, dude, you don't understand this yourself? Because this could be used against you at any point yourself. So how do you not understand that is one of the major cases in case law you need to you need to see? The other part is, and it was, and I don't remember the exact time and story that y'all did, and you've talked about this, and it's been a big issue, not just with here, but in the nation, about allowing officers to look at the footage before they make their statement or write a report. A lot of activists believe that that's not fair, and I do remember, because I was watching a video, you said to be able to get their story straight. You know what I mean? Is that an issue? What do you think about that? If they're allowed to get their story straight?
Well, I mean, would you be able to do that if we're talking about a discipline case, that's a civil situation. If it was a criminal case, do we afford members of the community that right to, we're thinking of charging you with this, but come in, we're going to watch everything together and then get your take on whether you think you did this or not.
But they're suspects at the time. The officers aren't necessarily suspects at the time.
Officers normally review the reports before trial. Even if they remember them, there's a copy of the reports given for them. Because sometimes there's like a lot of time between. It's an interesting dynamic, really. I mean, you're saying some things that I didn't really expect you to say. Like, you're not a big fan of slowing it by frame by frame by frame. You understand the ramifications of what happens when you wind up doing a story, but you still have an obligation to do the story. You understand that there's some peripheral damage that can come from that stuff. You had said that the chief just kind of comes in a little flat-footed, right?
That's been my experience, having covered probably more than 20 arbitration hearings at this point. I'm always able to tell when he's finished whether that officer is going to get his or her job back.
That's a good skill to have, right? Because you can see, like, you've been in enough of them to say, okay, this guy did his homework, did his job, presented the situation. or his positional facts appropriately or not. So why do you think it is that the city manager and the deputy city manager over public safety tolerate this?
Because, I mean, it's a simple reason. He's not there to be liked by the rank and file. The chief does not embarrass the city. This is the city of San Antonio is very image driven. They have branding. They're all about public perception. And Chief McManus, for whatever failings you want to attribute to him, is not a person that puts the city in a bad light.
Outside of costing him shit tons of money, right?
I mean, you can compare him to Chief Charles Hood, for example. Just as an example, he was another longtime chief, major department within the city. Probably more liked by rank and file. Had some run-ins with people who worked under him, but also had the issue where occasionally there would be news stories about things that Hood did that gave the city a back eye. The
you're not gonna get McManus.
sushi picture, some of the comments that Hood made that you could consider vulgar, which I think was the last straw for him. You don't. So those were situations where he gave the city a black eye. There were news stories done that were embarrassing for the fire department, for public safety. You don't really have that with Chief McManus, other than sometimes he misspeaks at chaotic crime scenes, but trying to brief the media shortly after something big has happened, and then he comes into arbitration and doesn't have a solid faculty of the facts, and then it's used against him to reinstate it.
So are you saying that, because with that statement you just made, he's not there for the rank and file to like? I don't, in the eyes of the city, and this is just me conjecturing. From what you're gathering, from what you're seeing.
I mean, I cover public safety. I do not work for the city, but he does not embarrass the people above him that he reports to. You've had other heads of departments that have, and their tenures as a result tend to be shorter than McManus, who's been a chief in a major city for a very long time.
He said his goal is to be the first 20-year chief. I mean,
it's just unheard of in a major city to have someone. I mean, look at Fort Worth, look at Dallas, look at Houston, how many times they've changed chiefs in the time that McManus has had his 2 tenures.
Yeah, well, he was gone for a very short period of time, but I mean, he said it multiple times. But I wanted to kind of, so let me ask you before we move over to like the district attorney real quick, because we run out of time fast. So knowing all this and knowing that maybe he's not there to be liked by the rank and file when he doesn't embarrass the city, what's your perception of the chief of police? And then the second question, what's your perception of the rank and file of the police department?
I mean, I have great respect for what you guys do. This is a very rough time to be a police officer. I couldn't imagine doing my shift wearing a camera at all times, capturing every interaction that I have with coworkers or members of the public. I think there's a lot of criticism from the public for whatever reason that you guys have to contend with. You go into dangerous areas, you put your life on the line. You have guys that are shot that then return to duty and continue being a police officer. I don't know if I could do something like that.
I got shot in 91. And
yeah.
But it was actually a good thing. It launched my career to
The better things that came out that actually kind of got me here. And I appreciate you saying that.
And I owe, my photographer and I were in a terrible situation a few years ago, covering just a random overnight fire, and
you were right there and the shots fired. So that's like a a lot of people go through shoot, don't shoot at the academy. You were literally in a get shot at or don't get shot at, right? And so did that change your perspective a little bit?
No, I mean, I already had a huge, wealth of respect for what you guys do.
So respectfully, would it come as a surprise to you that people don't think you have that kind of respect for police?
No, I don't. I know how police officers feel about me, but I cover public safety. These are the assignments I'm given. It's not going to stop me from doing it.
it's a job.
I'm not anti-police. A lot of my best story ideas on your department come from other guys in your agency.
What you said right there, well, probably because we get police officers that watch this, and I think it's going to go a long way with just for you acknowledging that. But the first part of the question, right, that was the second part. What's your perception of the chief of police? Are you able to say? Are you comfortable saying?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess I can give my opinion on it. I sort of already spelled it out. I think he does.
Do you think he's highly professional, a major city chief that could come in and represent San Antonio to the highest order?
I think that he has done a good job of staying away from embarrassing situations, which in a city like San Antonio is the most important thing he can do to keep longevity in his position. Does he upset the officers beneath him? Yeah, certainly so. I mean, we get tips and letters and stuff sent to us
the
all
culture,
the time.
the culture, I don't want to say the culture of the police department, but the culture in terms of confidence in the leadership is so low you can't even talk about it.
And I've seen the surveys and the results of it, the criticism of him and administration. I think to keep his position in San Antonio, and this isn't the case in every city in America, it's more important to continue to stay out of the crosshairs of the people above you rather than the people that work for you.
So in talking about that, we talked about the letter that you've seen that's out.
Talking about the anonymous.
The anonymous,
Sent to City Hall.
the anonymous letter. At one point, I was.
That's the worst thing, by the way. Like you can't send that to a reporter and hope that it turns into some big 3-minute story that's going to air on our late news. I mean, there's got to be more context given. There's got to be conversations that have, but behind the scenes, so that I can actually go and dig into what the issues are.
And so, just as accountable as we're held, because we do have the cameras here, and we do have the cameras in the cars. We do have people. It's popular to come up with every first thing something happens with the police, whether there's anything going on or not.
Right.
There's people videotaping that deal. So, and you said that he does a good job by not embarrassing the city. Do you think that's because he is actually staying out of trouble, or but because he's sweeping a lot of stuff under the rug?
I did a couple of stories a few years ago on an incident with the major crimes captain and his kind of quiet retirement from the department.
With us?
SAPD, Alex De La Garza. Other than that, I don't think there's been a lot of, this looks bad, let's do everything we can to keep it from coming out.
That you know of.
Fill me in then, please.
So do you know that there's 2 tiers of discipline in the police department, right? You understand that if it goes to internal affairs, that may not be public to you, because I imagine, I could be wrong, but I doubt if I'm wrong, if a suspension gets upheld, it goes to the Civil Service Commission. 180 days, which we could talk about in a minute, for it to be concluded. Then there's some more timelines, and then chief renders his decision, right? And then it goes over there, and then unless he wants to arbitrate it or whatever, and then it goes over to the Civil Service Commission. It takes so long to get through there, right. And then you probably send an intern or somebody over there to get the open records things, and then you decide what you're going to air and what you're not. Is that like close to accurate, something like that?
I mean, that seems, all I know is that we get access to it if it results in a suspension of 1 day or longer. Okay. Verbal counseling, written reprimands.
Well, that's the point I'm making.
Being put in the officer concern program, that's not something the city will ever confirm for us. We have other ways of doing it, but it's not an official record.
Public, right? Those aren't public. And so would it surprise you that there's a lot of things that happen with people that are very close to that McMahon circle that wind up in this tier and not this tier?
No, it wouldn't surprise me.
And so,
but I can't report on them if I don't know about them.
Well, I can report on it because I was there, right?
And I've never had someone give me that information and then we sit on it. If it's something that has happened, I can verify it, then we go with it.
Yeah. No, so I'm just saying, but my point is that he knows how to manipulate, and those close to him know how to manipulate that system. And there are often conversations that are had that says, look, if we wound up dropping this person into whatever a suspension, it's going to get to you. Yeah. So let's do a written reprimand, which goes in a file. And then somehow or another goes in their central 201 file and their IA file, right? Then there's a field file, right? And so there's 3 files. Oftentimes, If you go looking for that written reprimand later on, it's nowhere to be found, right? So, I mean, those things happen, right? But that's not new. But you did something in 2023 about Joe Gonzalez, right? About the amount of attorneys, experienced trial lawyers that were leaving. I think you said it was a very toxic, right, environment.
That was their words. Yeah, they described it as a toxic environment. It's a lot of turnover he's still dealing with. He was before Commissioner's Court this month. He blames it on outlying counties paying more for assistant DA positions.
What's he gonna say? I'm a terrible boss?
No, I don't think he would say that publicly. But yeah, that came from a laundry list of exit interviews. A couple of those employees spoke to us on the record for the story and kind of detailed their experiences working in that office.
A lot of really good trial lawyers, a lot of experienced people have left that office because of the toxicity. At the end of the day, it's just, it's hard to work for a bad boss, but there's no remedy for a bad boss. Like, you can't go get a lawyer and say, I don't like him because he's a mean boss. It's just a bad situation. And as long as it's allowed to be continued, right, to perpetuate itself, then there's no remedy. So people get to the point where they're tenured and they no longer want to deal with it.
So you don't think the vote of no confidence after the John Lee situation had any impact?
No, it was completely swept away by Cheryl. That was at 97%. 97% of the people, more people voted in that than have ever voted on a collective bargaining bill. They cared more about that than about their benefits and salaries. And so Cheryl, most chiefs would not be able to handle that.
Yeah.
It would be an immediate, you can tender your resignation or be fired.
McManus's statement when you talked about morale, liking it's not there for the rank and file to like him. I don't know how anybody that's a boss would expect that, and that's going to be healthy for the organization. Number one, you go back to the old Sun Tzu, documents that say that your men will not fight or die for you if they don't respect you. That's number one. I mean, we talked about the dangers of officers dying for themselves situations. Yeah. There's number one. He said, I think it was in an interview not long ago, that it's not up to him to boost our morale. It's up to the field supervisors. Right? Yeah, to do that. Well, there's just sergeants. Those guys are just, they're still in the field themselves. They're boots on the ground as well. They do their best if they can, but they're still accountable. Because I think once you get up to around, and no disrespect, because I retired as a detective, to get around captain and lieutenant, you've separated yourself from those boots on the ground now. Right. And I think the ship rolls downhill to a point and uphill to a point right there for these people. And it's with the officers, and for that vote of no confidence, one of the biggest issues, and I'm sure you've heard this from people you've talked to, they feel like no one has their back, particularly on administration, which is extremely important.
And city hall,
city government and things like that. And I believe that just due to the culture, and again, it's not just San Antonio, the chief is, according to Matty Pelias, the chief polls like at the top 3 of
HEB, the Spurs.
He's very popular.
Yeah, and so what I see and the things we're talking about, we talk about the process and the arbitration, I thought he's kind of popular because it appears like he's holding us accountable, regardless if he over disciplines us or not. So the people that don't like us go, hey, good for him. And then when we get our jobs back in arbitration, because they go through a system, it is a legal system, because there's people that scream no justice, no justice, no peace, whatever. Well, when people go through the justice system and it doesn't come out their way, then that's still not justice.
Right.
So for a lot of people or groups, it's Ananda Thomas and that for sake. I'll say that flat out.
And it puts the chief in a good position, because it said, well, he tried to fire him.
Right.
Which is the advice he got in 2020 a lot. Hey, well, you know what? Just go ahead and cut him loose, and if he gets his job back.
Which I've always wondered this. How long of a suspension really would take a chunk out of you as an officer? Like, I kept my job, but this really sends a message that I screwed up and I cannot repeat that kind of action
so anything
again.
30 days or under, the officers can forfeit time.
Right.
Which is still money, right? I mean, you take off or you're not. So anything above that, they can't. They have to take the suspension. You can give up to 45 days on his own if the officer agrees. Anything outside of that's an indefinite. There are rare occasions.
I've done. I did one on a guy who got 216 days.
Rare occasions
Yeah.
when that happens, but for the most part, these are the guidelines.
So would 45 days for an unjustified use of force be enough to keep an officer from doing something like that?
Well, there's 22 working days in a month for the police department, so you double that. That's 2 months' pay. That's a lot.
Yeah.
You know,
Not just that, but usually they'll, depending on the unit that they're in, they'll transfer them out.
Yeah.
And send them to, if you're a patrol officer, and let's say you're working, let's say in intelligence, the SARIC or whatever. That's a pretty good gig.
Yeah.
You go back to East Dog Watch
Right.
with Tuesday, Wednesdays off. The
Right.
worst, and it screws up your family time and your whole schedule, maybe extra jobs and stuff like that.
and even if you're a DI, because most aren't grandfathered now, so
No,
you're taken back as a
you-
UEDI.
UEDI and go back in there, or and that's often used by a lot of the officers to let's not talk too much about it, because there's that long arm that they can still get at.
And it happens to
For the-
sergeants,
for the
sergeants,
betterment of-
lieutenants, and captains.
Yes.
Right.
Right, for the betterment of the department, which is the catch-all with a lot of stuff. You have no recourse. They thought that it was better that you go over here and we put this person on. No one's going to go through that litigation to try to win that of any sort.
And then you have the union really not chiming in and defending, so the officers' rights, so management's rights is kind of taken off, right? So the union hasn't done a very good job under this union president defending the officers. Now that's his prerogative. But it's just kind of a culture, right? It's just kind of, so I wanted to ask you, were you involved in that Final Four story?
The city council tickets, yeah. I mean, anything that comes out of our unit, I've either reviewed the script or had a hand in helping to get the record.
So it's kind of interesting, right? I wanted to know your take, because I looked at it, right? It came out. One is that this is my opinion. It doesn't necessarily reflect anybody else's, right? We've had 3 Final Fours, and it takes work to get them. Generate millions of dollars, right? A couple of them said, hey, I was there on city business. I'm not going to pay for them. I was doing this. Now, maybe they should have paid for their +1. I think that should have happened. But some of them returned the money. Some of them said no. I want to say most of the people that were running for mayor didn't attend, right?
One of them went for an hour, which is criminal in and of itself to go to the Final
But I know
Four and leave
Andrea
after
Rocha
60
Garcia,
minutes.
she said she was reimbursing it. Mark White said he was, Mark White said he was reimbursing it. I think Kaur said, I'm not telling you who I went with. Jalen Mackey Rodriguez says, I was there on city business. Phyllis Villaregon said the same. Terry Castillo, I think she did go. Anyway, Melissa Javiera, Marina Gavito, Manny Pelaez, and John Courage did not go.
Right.
But what happened to those tickets? They all got tickets.
We're digging in, trying to find out if those went back to the NCAA pool or.
Well, they bought
I mean, this story's not finished being reported. That was sort of the tip of the iceberg.
$1,000 a ticket, and there were 2 tickets. So 6, 7, 8, 9. That's 4. So 8 tickets. What happened to those tickets?
Yeah.
And Eric Walsh later came out and says, I authorized that, right, out of the Alamo Dome proceeds. Did you guys ever get a chance to Eric Walsh? Did you have tickets?
They bought tickets for him. He gave them back. I think the mayor used those tickets, and then Walsh bought his own. That was in the invoices that I saw.
Okay, so he said, I got tickets, but I gave them to the mayor.
Without asking Walsh, the city included him in this allotment. He found out about it, gave those back, and then used his. Found out that the city had purchased tickets for him, and he made the choice, based on the records I've seen, to buy his own tickets to the final.
That seems like a little preemptive fixing there. But let me ask you something. So we can't really understand where these tickets went for the other 4. But my question to you, you're an investigative journalist, you're good at your job, right? Why were there so many different courses of action? Like the city code of ethics is very much in place. Why do some people feel like, hey, this is part of my job in order to facilitate future NCAA Final Four?
Because I don't think they thought it would ever come out that this had happened. And it's probably happened at a number of other big events, either hosted by the Alamo Dome or other city facilities.
These are our city leaders. One of these is going to probably be mayor unless Ortiz wins, right? And so this is going to be the head of our agency. Like I started, I really think that, giving them a ticket to go to try to rub elbows with the NCAA to try to get a fourth wouldn't probably be a bad idea. They'll make a lot of money anyway, but I mean, at the end of the day, the future has to be a part of our consideration today. But it was just really, interesting to me that nobody said, where are these other 8 tickets? And then why did Eric give the tickets back? Like, well, did he have like a moment of conscience or something?
Probably. I mean, we're trying to figure out that, we wanted to run this story while the Final Four was still fresh in everyone's mind. Right. So we went with the records that we got back on it. But both are valid questions, and both, deserve scrutiny from the public.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting too, though. I mean, as a sitting city council person, that they don't totally understand what the code of ethics was. As a captain, every year at the end, we had to put together a document saying, do you receive any gifts? Do you have any other jobs? And you know what? And now this wasn't a gift, right? It wasn't a gift, right? The gift would be if NCAA gave them the tickets, the city actually purchased them. So, right. So I don't think that that's a valid argument. But I do think it's interesting to find out what happened to those other tickets, and how much and when did Eric Walsh know that this story was coming out. Well, you got anything on the Final Four?
I wish I could have gone.
I can see why the mayor would be there.
Yeah.
I understand that, because in a lot of ways it's like a symbolic position. We're a city manager-led city, so the mayor only has so much power. But he is a front-facing person, a public persona. Yeah, sure. I can see that. City council person, many of the people in their own district don't know who they are. And I think that's why we went with the story.
Yeah, it's just my opinion. I don't have a problem with your opinion, and I don't have a problem with citizens saying, hey, they shouldn't have went. I just can understand that the future is a part of what these people today have to consider.
Yeah.
But I just thought it was very interesting, the different responses by these city leaders when somebody just caught them red-handed.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to do that.
Well, and a lot of it correlating from the things we've been talking about being accountable for these things, and obviously setting a good example, because that wouldn't be tolerated with us, that's for sure. And again, one of the things that I think even our own department forgets is, regardless of your rank, and let's say you're the chief here, deputy chief or whatever, to the lowly patrolman here, some of these guys have master's degrees at this rank. So things are done up here in the hopes of this person not figuring that out. So they're supposed to set that example, just like the city is what he's talking about. The ethical, the ethical thing to do with that situation.
Right.
And one of the things that we're getting at, and obviously talking about that letter again, because there's other things that have been out that we've seen. The officers now have seen at least that document, and I'm sure pretty soon, if we keep at it, they're going to see the other documents, and it all makes sense because they're seeing it for themselves, or they're involved in it for themselves.
Willie, can I just ask real quick on the letter? Would it surprise you to know that somebody on the police department was monitoring Willie Cantu's social media account? Because he posted that letter. And finding the officer, like, you can pull up who liked it, right? And so that's back to why anonymity, right? People don't feel like they can say or do anything. There's no course of relief, right? And so whoever liked it was being called into internal affairs and now having to become respondents to a conduct and behavior complaint because they liked it. Nowadays, people like stuff they don't even look at.
Right.
Although they probably.
One of them was,
were they suspended? Is it ongoing?
There was some counseling's given. Again, things that won't come back out to you.
My deal is always like, I shouldn't even get a finger wag over this. Like, don't do that again. It should have never been. And we talk about, we talk about 180-day rule. If you can't do what you need to do within that time, but yet you're doing stupid things like this,
right,
you're wasting your time. Your
resources are being used in the wrong
in the wrong place. So one of them was the husband of someone. His wife liked the post, and she has her own account. It's not even a joint account.
She's not even on the
and he got called for that. Yeah. And it's what it does. I mean, like, for someone like me, it depends on the officer. I'd be like, I'll write something. I didn't know about it. Here you go. And end it. But for a lot of them, they're like, and especially the ones that are in those units that they don't want to be kicked out of. that happen. It's starting to kind of die down, I'm hearing. But what they're doing especially, and I think the real crux of that investigation, is they're going after a female captain.
Yeah, who had
that
his hire
situation.
Ben Cifuentes, and they've been targeting this female captain. And I'm saying targeting. I'll say it 10 times if you want me to. This female captain in particular. There's only one female captain, so you can figure it out.
Yeah.
And she's a good officer, a good commander, a smart person with a compass that points north. In other words, she doesn't just buy to whatever they say when they say it. She'll protect your troops from whatever they need to, but she'll also handle it administratively when necessary. They just don't like her. It's a very much a vendetta-based kind of thing. So, I mean, those are the kind of things that kind of go on. I mean, you said you follow up on an anonymous letter that's sent to your station or another station because it's not going to turn into a 3-minute story.
Well, there needs to be more context to it. Someone, the author of it, someone who witnessed what's laid out in there, needs to come and talk to me. And I'm not a big fan of people who no longer work for the police department still wanting anonymity. There are members of his command staff, while he was chief, who have since retired, that will tell me things every now and again, but they don't want it getting back to them, or they don't want to go on the record with it. And it's like, you don't work there anymore. Enough of that.
So I know some of these people are watching. Do you hear that?
I've told them that,
Well, this is the most interesting thing because we've invited some of those people to come on, and I have great respect for them. I mean, good leaders, right? We talk a lot about bad leaders. These were really good leaders, but for whatever reason, and it's I'm not throwing shade or casting any of that stuff. Police officers, for the most part, not all, but the most, are very brave and courageous when it comes to handling situations where they have to put themselves between you and a threat. But when it comes to things like this, not so much. I don't know why. I don't know if they want to be associated with it, another job, maybe they're going to be employed at some point.
I mean, they can't come after your, what action can they take against you once you've retired and you're collecting your pension?
They're just cynical because they didn't get promoted.
Yeah.
So let me tell you, I mean, and this is my belief of that, if it makes sense or not. Tell me if it doesn't. But I was, and I believe a lot of officers, they should be confrontational. That's your job. You get into things. You're supposed to see suspicious activity, and you go and put yourself into it. That's what. But a lot of officers really are not in certain situations. I'm not saying that I tried to bring up things and fight about them just for no reason because I had nothing better to do. But I'm also not afraid, nor is he obviously, to confront people and go, hey man, we don't think this is right. I mean, this is what we're doing kind of right now, And like you weren't in here when I explained to him, to Dillon earlier, was that I think some of these guys, when they leave, when you get out of the mix, you start to relax a lot, and then you're like, you know what? When they do think about it, it pisses them off when they've already become happy. So it's like, I'm just gonna leave this alone, and I don't want to go back because it was toxic. And like I mentioned to him, one of the deputy chiefs said he was sick to his stomach every time he went to work.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
And which would surprise me when he told me about that. I'm like, holy moly, this dude is an upstanding guy.
So Sundays he would start to get nauseous and the anxiety of having to deal with just that much of a toxic background. Yeah. Well, neither one of us are anonymous, and I'm telling you, an investigative reporter with KSAT, that everything in that letter is true. Yeah, it's a bad environment. He surrounds himself with people that are yes people, that really contribute to his downfall. They don't give him good advice, and that's part of the problem. But, we're not going to dwell on the letter.
I'll tell you, there's a couple of stories that can come out of that, but they have not surfaced. And I don't know enough about them to really talk about them. I believe they're true because I've heard it from several people. I just don't know enough to say, hey, let me talk to you about it. Again, it's going to have to somebody very close, I won't say involved, that will really embarrass when you talk about that would embarrass the city, because some of these things are being swept under the rug, and that's out of kind of friendship.
Yeah, my last assignment was as the patrol division XO. I didn't ask for that assignment. I was drafted there. I spent 6 years at covert. Prior to that, the gang and intelligence put me at Peru and then down there. So they put me on the floor to see it all. Why? I don't know. Maybe they're not that smart. But anyway, everything just kind of came through me. And I can tell you it's very difficult. But as far as what they're doing in these conduct behavior, they're writing things like this. verified. You're basically these people that are liking and doing things like that. They're verifying the document's veracity. Well, the document there's veracity to it. Undermining the effectiveness of the department. Well, no, you're undermining the effectiveness of the department by the way you're doing business, right? Were defamatory. The documents were defamatory, and undermining the effectiveness of the public's confidence. And they use words like that because they use them all the time. That whole part of the general manual is intended, and I'm sure you've looked at it, is intended to apply to something. Like if they don't have something, like a particular, we'll just go into section 300 of the rules and regs and find something. Yeah. And so, the reason I say that is because I know their MO. I know how they work when they work it. So, it's an interesting dynamic, and I really appreciate it. I know Willie said something to me. He says, he's probably going to tell you this. I'm just jumping a little bit. We hope that maybe you can learn a little bit about something, and that we can learn a little bit about something. And I really did. I learned a little bit more about you, a lot more about you, and the fact that you don't have this great vendetta against police officers, and that you, from what you say, we respect what they do every day. And that's something that we would like to echo over and over and over again, because I think most people feel that way. It's just hard when you do stories like, what was the Blue story again? What was it called? Broken Blue. And at one point you went back 7, 8, 9 years. And then I know you said you understand the ramifications, but just when they're getting their lives back in order, like boom, there it is again. Yeah. And they have to
rehash something that had already played out.
And so that's tough. And we'd ask that you maybe consider that. It's tough to kind of get your footing back, and then boom, you're right back in it.
And we understand ratings and things like that. That's your job. We want to entice people to watch. And you said something to Joe Gonzalez. I was listening to the interview with him. You're talking about his that stipend he was getting.
Car allowance?
Yeah, car allowance. And he says, well, you're not reporting on the things that I've done here. And you said, look, we don't report on the airplanes that land. Right. We report on the airplanes that crash. And I was like, wow, okay, I get that. And who's to say, hey, today, 50 airplanes landed safely. Okay.
You a smug remark, right? He says, hey, if you or the voters don't like it, then vote me out.
He within that same conversation said that he reports to the residents of Bexar County, not to Dillon Collier. And I said, I am a resident of Bexar County. I live in San Antonio city limits.
Yeah.
The media in a lot of ways answers questions on behalf of the public, and our job is to keep the public informed. And at the end of the day, the people that work at that TV station, the other media outlets, are citizens of this community. I'm not some guy who just jumps in, does the story and then jumps out. I have to live in this community as well. I have concerns about violent people being taken off the street who are then put back on the street, reoffend before they even go to trial for the original thing. Maybe they've had a conviction in the past. They're not in prison, probably should be. They're back on the street, and then we sort of saw that play out with that string of police shootings of them shooting officers.
So with that, and maybe y'all got off of it because there's not much there anymore because they stopped talking to you.
The Rent Collective. Do you think he's still being guided
by the Rent Collective?
I don't. I think he's a lot of that communication between that Austin group and the DA's office was the head of the Rent Collective and Christian Hendrickson, who was Joe's, his first assistant district attorney. Christian left. He now works in Austin.
That's where he belongs.
I think a lot of that has ceased. The last communication I've seen...
I'm hearing otherwise. He's still being guided. The verdict that came out where that guy shot at the 3 officers, one of them lost his eye, that plea bargain, and we did a podcast with Nico about it.
The length of the prison sentence?
Yeah, 8 felonies, violent felonies, and he gets just 45 years. The guy that shot me back in '91, he got 40 years, and he spent half of it. I mean, at the time, I didn't think it was fair, but I was young and dumb. And by the time that verdict came up, I was already back in shape. I was on SWAT. They're like, well, we put you in front of a jury looking like you do now. What kind of case are we going to have? So okay, well, you guys are the experts. And I don't remember who the DA was back then. But I'm hearing that he's still being guided by the Rent Collective. And when I saw that verdict, I don't think Joe is woke enough to
do something like that. So he needed guidance from people in Austin to do some of this stuff.
It is surprising that someone can shoot multiple San Antonio police officers and not get a sentence that'll keep them in prison for the rest of their life, no matter what technicality.
Or at least take it to court, and let the jurors decide that, because that sits a little bit better. Even if the same verdict came out, it wouldn't sit well, but it'd be better and Joe wouldn't get blamed for making some sort of, anti-police deal is what it is.
Can I just hit this real quick? So we've been telling the people that are running for mayor that we pulled the numbers since 2019, and there's been almost 160. We're about ready to wrap it up here. I know we're keeping you.
No.
Yeah, so it's about 160, just shy of like 159, I think, officer-involved shootings. That's a lot of officer-involved shootings. Fortunately, we haven't lost any of them since 2019. We've had a lot injured. Officer Shoquist lost an eye. Yeah. Officer Rule was shot. Officer Chavez lost some hearing, and the list goes on and on. We had 7 shots just at the beginning of January. We've also lost officers in your tenure here, as a San Antonio resident. Do you remember any of them? I'm not trying to put you on. Marconi. Bobby Decker, yeah, and Miguel Moreno. And then we lost Evans as a complication to a 2003. There are very brave people out here that are San Antonio heroes, right? That lay down their lives, gave their lives for the citizens of this community. I know you do from what you said, but I just didn't want to miss the opportunity to say when doing stories on some of these guys that you think are degrading or not living up to their commitment, there are a lot of them that do and that have given or sacrificed everything for that. And that's just
and there's certain things to remember, like especially with police action,
that a lot of people don't get, to include people in the police department. You'd expect action beats reaction. And what's going on now, for one, when he's talking about these people wanting to shoot at officers more, we have lost our first 2 levels of force, our presence and our verbal, because society, and not just San Antonio, and to me, weak city government leaders have allowed them to diminish. So,
can you expand on how you've lost those 2 things?
People don't respect us. They're coming up in front of us.
The mere presence of an officer is...
Well, like if we were, let's say at Fiesta, you know what I mean? And I walked Market Square.
A lot of fights happen around the bathrooms that were along Commerce over there. You send a couple of officers over there, people kind of go, oh, okay. We don't have to say anything. That is a level of force, our presence. Some, they might be bowing up, hey dude, move on. There's another level of force. If they don't move on, then we put our hands on it. So because it's been popular and the TikTok videos, YouTube stuff, to talk back to us and demean us, because now you have some of these idiots that call themselves educators.
First Amendment auditors.
Auditors. Hey, what's your badge number? Dude, I don't even know who you are. For one, I shouldn't let those people that close to me.
Yeah.
With things that are going on. So those things have diminished. So the next thing that happens is hands-on. People don't like to be touched by someone that they don't want to be touched by. So that's where it starts. And again, I don't know if they'll ever come back, but action beats reaction. While we're trying to be pleasant to the perception of most citizens, we're not doing a lot of things that we're actually justified in doing, like someone that's being boisterous. And I feel like, especially you kind of look at them, they might look like a gang member or whatever, just by the way they're dressed or tattoos, and they're being boisterous in this situation. They can't leave because they're part of whatever investigation. I can handcuff you for your safety and mine.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But that's not happening anymore because these officers are afraid of what might come out of that.
Just for detaining
somebody. You know what I mean? And because there's always going to be critics of it, and then we have, I don't know how much of the podcast you've watched, I'm not a big fan of de-escalation in the sense of it becoming an attack. De-escalation is just that. You might do it with your wife. Hey, take it easy. You know what I mean? It's an action that a lot of people take, whether they know it or not. But what's happened is that they think it's become like this is going to work majority of the time. A lot of times you can't stop these people because it's already escalated to a certain point. So now I'm going to have to skip certain levels of force, or I might even have to go hard hands or go straight to deadly force, just depending on how that goes. The end result, which a lot of people don't like, to me it didn't matter, because if it was justified in shooting them, killing them, that's the way it goes. But we all know it's not popular to get to that point.
I might have to do something really like what happened with Wilson. Get a broken orbital eye socket to where I don't have to shoot him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But this right here, because how awful it looked, now I'm in trouble. You know, the violence of it. You know what I mean? And you and I need to talk, because I can tell you a lot more about that situation than we have time for. And you'll find it interesting about how the perception of those two officers and their actions were totally wrong with that. You know, but I don't want to say it because one of them still.
He's got his hearing in June.
Yeah. One of them
If they even let it get to that, I mean, they may.
I don't know. I don't know.
Reinstate. Well, we cover those hearings, and
Good for you.
you know, we see how it plays out. The arbitrator issues the award, the officer gets reinstated, and some of the follies that take place during those hearings are then rebroadcast. So they may not even let it get to that point based on what happened with Thomas.
So my point of explaining that was, if again, it's only a request, and you know, from someone that is now considered an expert, and I don't sell that. I don't have a shirt or a hat that says all that. It's just what's happened. That a lot of the action that happens in fractions of a second are not necessarily wrong. They may look wrong, and you can actually, I won't even say fabricate, but you can articulate them as looking wrong. Whereas I look at something and go, no, he was justified in doing that. You know, but it's being sold out in the story that they were wrong. You know, and if you can just, I don't know, maybe look at Graham versus Connor.
Okay.
Check it out. I think it'll be eye-opening to what officers are, for one, justified in doing. And there's other case law that's involved, Terry versus Ohio, all these other things.
That one I've heard of.
Yeah, to look at. But those are the crux of our authorities. We're trained in these, in those.
Well, for one, they learn about it.
And of course, we're trained on the laws and then the penal code of, or the criminal code of procedure of what we can and cannot do. And I tell you, it's not easy, because you're having to make these decisions in fractions of a second. And not maybe just for your own life, but the life of the public. You know, like, people don't understand that if I've got a guy out here with a gun threatening suicide, and I've got him contained, and he is just off his rocker, maybe I know a little bit about him, I can't let this guy move into, let's say you live in a neighborhood behind here. I got to stop him from entering.
Because it doesn't look right to shoot.
Him. Back when I was on SWAT, we gave him a line in the sand. He gets past that, he gets smoked. Because I can't let him get into the rest of the public.
Yeah.
You know, I really don't want him to shoot, because I hope he misses me, but where's that bullet going to go? And people don't understand that. You know, and you know, there's so much to think about. Of course, our main objective is public safety, you know, and ours to be included. Yeah, we did buy off on the dangers involved in it, but nothing in no document says you need to die doing it.
Right.
And you need to die trying to be de-escalatory, or trying to think about not hurting this person, you know, things like that. Almost every situation with involved in uses of force with officers, there's always a common denominator that would have worked. Comply. And these people don't. You know, that's the first thing. After that, I don't know what else is going to happen.
Yeah.
You know, on that, you know, going back, because I know we talk. I know it's been an hour. I told you we keep an hour. I have like 2 more minutes. Are you okay with that?
As long as you want to go.
Yeah.
I'm looking at, I was going to bring up a case that we've got coming up in a couple of days.
For sure. I just wanted to come, because early on I said, hey, look, when people talk about the arbitrator, of course the arbitrator gave him his job back, but the chief didn't want him on the department. I don't think people always understand. I watched that Broken Blue thing. You talked about the arbitration process, but I don't think people really understand is that the collective bargaining agreement is an agreed upon document between the city and our association. It's ratified by our membership and then voted on by city council. All of that stuff is contained in there. When it comes to the arbitration process, and we touched on it briefly, you know, it goes to the disciplinary hearing and ultimately gets over there, and then they want to arbitrate it. In other words, the officers, I don't agree with your opinion. I don't want to be fired, and I'm going to arbitrate it. They can arbitrate any suspension, 3 days, 5 days, whatever. Most of the time they don't. But if they're taking it, it's in the contract that the city signed. It was either Cheryl Scully's signature on that contract or Eric Walsh's signature, right? They're right there. And there's 7 arbitrators. unless they agree to one mutually, they strike them until they get one.
Yeah.
So when people say the arbitrator did it, it's a mutual decision by the city and the police department or the association to have that arbitrator. Because it often sounds like the arbitrators are hand-picked. And I know one of the stories, I don't think it was you, maybe it was Tim Gerber, I don't even know if that guy's around anymore. But he said something about these guys also get compensated for it. So oftentimes they don't want to do anything that's going to cause them future assignments.
Split the baby, they call it.
Yeah. And so I think those are difficult things because they're supposed to be a fair and neutral arbitrator. And I just want people, because it seems like they always go back to say, well, the chief did the right thing, but the arbitrator gave him their job back. And I'll go back and I won't beat this horse, but if the chief would have done his job correctly, maybe the arbitrator wouldn't have done that.
So how should that be phrased in a news broadcast when we're doing a story on a guy who's just been reinstated?
How should you phrase that?
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that the arbitrator's decision said that the officer should get his job back. But I also think it's important that the listeners understand that the arbitrator wasn't picked by one side or the other. The arbitrator was agreed to by both entities. And that arbitrator came up with this decision. So before you start saying that the chief is the begin and save all, somebody should start looking at the fact that the chief wasn't able to justify his actions to the point that satisfied the arbitrator. Was his actions justified, and was that justification enough to warrant the discipline that he ultimately levied? That's how it should be phrased.
Well, I don't think it was you that was interviewing on that Broken Blue with Mike Kelly, because Mike Kelly was association president back then.
I did do the Helly interview.
Did
Yeah.
you? Okay, because he said something about the process. The process there is there to protect the officers from, obviously wrongful termination, and he mentioned politics. I believe, and I'm sure David believes too, what's going on lately with the chief really quickly wiping his hands of these officers. He's avoiding the hard questions from the Ananda Thomases and Act 4SA, the anti-police people that come up and stick a camera in his face. Those questions are easily answered. That doesn't mean you're going to like the answers. And that, to me, that's cowardice. You stick to your guns because they can go look that up if they wanted to, which they won't, and see that these officers, what he believes at the time, based on the information that he knows, were correct in their actions. But I believe, the biggest display of that was when he fired those officers on the South Side shooting on that mentally ill woman.
The Melissa Perez case, yeah.
Yeah, he fired them really. I'm not
within
saying
24 hours.
He fired them really quick.
He didn't fire him. He arrested him within 24 hours.
Right. And so that was a huge political move on him. Now, that's going to get litigated too. Obviously, I'm going to work on those cases as well. And whatever comes out of that, and obviously I believe we're going to win it. And whatever comes out, of course, we're never going to come back to what's happened here. You can't unbeat that drum, that's already, or the damage that's happened here from them. But I believe that was the biggest display of him showing the politics involved in that, because they moved quickly on it, and it's unprecedented. And I really called out the association president for not talking about that. Come on, man. These guys were all supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. Well, it's supposed to apply to police officers, and you won't find a police officer that doesn't believe that, anymore. But
Run the investigative course.
Right.
I'm not saying they wouldn't have been fired later.
Or arrested.
Yeah, or arrested later, but you did it as a sign to show these people.
James Brennan, do you think that moved too fast?
Yes. And especially by the DA. Because the DA dropped the charges on this kid, selling it as if, well, if he passes, I want his family to be with him.
I'll get that. But when he got out, and even to this day,
He never picked the charges back up. He picked up more charges because he's a little turd. I'm sorry to say that, I will, not sorry, but he picked up more
He's
cases.
a serial evader of arrests. I mean, that's...
This is the McDonald's.
Well, that we know. That,
Eric Cantu is the victim / now defendant in a number of evaders.
It wasn't what Brendan's the officer, right? I just
Yeah.
want to make sure. Didn't somebody try to run him over the other day?
Yeah, we reported on that. James Michael Cox got arrested. Yeah, outside of we covered his hearing. He went to leave the courthouse, and this guy in a Prius, some kind of Toyota.
Do you know why the chief fired Brennan so quickly?
No.
Because he could.
He was on probation.
He was
a young officer.
Well, when you're on probation,
You're out with
the chief can walk in, hey, you're doing a really good job, and you're like, yeah, I know, you're gone.
But why not tell us that Brennan had pursued that same suspect the night before in the same part of town, driving the same vehicle? I mean, that's something that I had to then dig out and report months later. And that would have been, again, like, don't say anything unless you're going to give us the important context.
Let me tell you how this happens. And you can quote me on your own personal air. This is how this happens. They get there and they start looking at it. And then here comes Bobby Bland. And then at the time, it comes Karen Falks. And here comes Jesse Solomon, who's actually a pretty good guy. And then it was Einquist. I think he was still here. And they're talking to the chief. And they're talking about how this is going to play. And they're talking about what a shitstorm this is going to become. And then one of them tells him, Chief, you should just cut him loose now. You should just cut him loose. Even if he gets his job back, we're going to look like we're golden. That's how that stuff happens. I know that's how it happens. So even if the chief don't come in that way, he leaves that way because they're influencing him. And that's what happened in 2020. All these cases that are coming out now, they happened 5 years ago. They're just now coming to light. So his behavior isn't new. It's just now being displayed through these arbitration hearings. And I don't know why they didn't tell you that he evaded the day before, because that's how the whole contact started.
Yeah.
He says, oh, that's the guy that ran from me. They were sitting there in the parking lot. He went up, tried to take him, and the guy backed up, opened up the car door, and the rest is history. Right?
But we had even our own officers that were commenting on that, about how he screwed up. And my deal is like, hey, dude, you can't tell me that you haven't screwed up yourself.
Well, I don't think he ever imagined in a million years the guy would back up and, do what he did. I guess you could have blocked him in. I don't even know what the proper police procedure is.
But the other thing is, if you look at the general manual, we're not supposed to be blocking people in. Yeah. Like, we're not supposed to be doing anything. The one thing that's going to be hard in that case, and I'm not going to ask Willie because I know he's going to work on it, is for the officer or the officer's attorney to articulate at what point was there no longer a threat. Goes back to caught. At what point did that officer no longer perceive his life to be in peril? That's what's going to come down to.
Well, that's not necessarily, it doesn't end with his life in peril.
Was Brennan hit by the door?
Yes.
Because that's been the mystery out there, is whether the car hit him as Cantu backed up.
I mean,
I think that case has holes because of what Cantu has done since he got out of the hospital because of his injuries. I mean, I've done a number of stories on his repeated run-ins with police, and it wasn't just evading arrest. There's a theft case from a Walmart that is going to be difficult for the DA's office to overcome. Like this
really
is the victim in your case.
They have not stepped away from that, and there's more taxpayer money wasted on something just to save face or whatever.
But that officer's never getting his job back. You know, he's on probation
because he doesn't have the arbitration rights.
He didn't have the rights, of that arbitration.
But could he become a police officer somewhere else?
Because that was the Luckhurst incident, right? And we were going to talk about that, but just real quick, because I know we're going way long here. But on that, I can tell you as a police, I've never met that officer, but I can tell you that both incidents involving that guy, one led to his termination, the other could have had problems with feces. Like, I don't want that kind of shit around me. No pun intended.
What about an officer who goes into a park where there are people living there, camping there, and uses the knife to pop the tires on all their property, their trailer and their bike?
Yeah, that's criminal mischief on his side. Whether he's on duty or not, that's not.
It's about to come up.
Was
that the case you were going to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the ones that they release the suspensions once a month. That one was in there, and it had honestly shades of Luckhurst. It's kind of taking advantage of someone who's down on their luck. And
so because of the depletion of officers that we're having, and it's across the nation, and the obvious thing, because I talked to somebody from recruiting too. Oh, we're getting people wanting to get their jobs back. I saw their list of academy dates. It looked like a concert tour. I've never seen that many classes going on at the same time, which means that we're behind. A lot of it is because of the climate of law enforcement. A lot of the tenured officers that wanted to stick around for a certain amount of time for the best, pension, are trying to figure out how soon they can leave because they're sick of it. Some of the newer officers that don't have the time are just realizing, especially if they've been touched by what they believe is wrongful discipline, they're just like, you know what, I'll just go back to being a
or go to another agency.
Yeah.
My daughter left here after 2 years to become a federal agent. That wasn't me pushing her. That was her.
Yeah.
You know.
So that stuff right there is now we're having to recruit more to keep up with the numbers, for the officers in the number of city. We've lowered the standards. So that case you're talking about, is this guy would have never been hired, Luckhurst would have been hired under the old way.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So that it's a domino effect.
Going on Luckhurst, because I know you said that during that Broken Blue, is there was a loophole with the time. My whole point about the contract was these are negotiated things by both entities. There's a lawyer that's assigned to the police department. That guy's name was Rayna, I think, Robert Rayna or something, right? Always dressed sloppy, whatever. Like, he didn't look like he was coming to do it. He wasn't Perry Mason. And there's a lot of cases, a lot, more than just this one, where people have been on the police department because they couldn't meet the 180 days. Well, if they didn't meet the 180 days, they're not doing their job. Like, it's already gone through that, right? A lot of times the IU investigation will finish in the 175th day. The chief can schedule a disciplinary hearing the very next day or in 2 days. But the chief should know that. His assistant chief should know that. His chief of staff should know that. The lawyer should damn sure know that. Internal affairs, the investigator that worked on that case knows the clock. So when they're not doing it, it's not a loophole. They're not doing their jobs correctly. And the list is long.
But the other part too is there was a case, again, not to get into another case, but
And I'm sure you're familiar with it. It was Vargas. They asked for a 45-day extension. And his attorney was Cleet, thought that he was doing it because it was around COVID time, that they needed more time to find a venue for social distancing, whatever that crap was. And so he granted it. When he granted it, then they brought up that excessive unnecessary force charge, which got him fired. That's kind of backstabbing and definitely headhunting on that.
Not good faith.
Yeah,
It's not good faith.
yeah, and that's what happened. But then in the arbitration, that was another one. I don't know if it's the same one you're talking about. The chief couldn't remember why they asked for it.
That Vargas, yeah.
Yeah, Anquist couldn't remember why they asked for it because they don't keep notes.
All bullshit. Those guys know exactly what happened and when it happened. There's no way. You're not Joe Biden, all right? You know what happened. You're expected to know what happened. That comes with the position of not just a police officer, but a high-level police officer with administrative duties. And it's really sad to see that, because when you talk about Vargas, if you remember that arbitrator, and we did a podcast on it, the chief didn't even review the offense report. But I know we're going in circles here.
No, I mean, I'm in the room while that's taking place. It's surprising to me that he would come in and testify. If you look at both sides, the attorney for the officer, the attorneys for the city, they've got binders that are this thick. I mean, they're just full of exhibits, and years have passed, so they've accumulated a lot of paperwork on these cases. It has been surprising that he comes in and can't recall some of the key facts.
Lose it because he knows and he banks on the fact that at the end of the day, even if the officer gets his job back, somebody out there with Act 4SA or somebody else, maybe in the media, is going to say, well, the chief tried to fire him. The arbitrator gave him his job back.
Let me ask this real fast, and then we keep on talking about time and all that because we can go all day. Why do y'all take any statement at any kind of value from Act 4SA regarding police action? Because they have no qualifications. And up until now, from when they started, they have brought absolutely nothing to the table that helps. All they are is, to me, whiners and crybabies. So why do y'all approach them?
I think because it's difficult, and I can give you another example. It's difficult to find people who are willing to elaborate on why a situation is problematic. It's tough to get people to talk about why a shooting is controversial. You would get a briefing from McManus and this is if it's a San Antonio shooting. We get a briefing from McManus at the scene. He doesn't address the media after that. They won't talk again about the case until they release body camera footage anywhere from 30 to 60 days later. So that sort of gives the alternate angle of why, why do some people view this shooting as problematic?
They're not some people, they're activists. They hate the police. I would ask Ananda Thomas, my first question is, you tell me, there has to be justified shootings. We see them. These officers are cleared. In your eyes, which shootings were justified? And I promise you, none of them will.
Right.
Because it's all about, we're in an era of feelings. If it hurts your feelings, it's got to be wrong. And we pander to those people, you know, and especially for them and for her, if the suspect is black, right? Then it's going to be a bigger problem, you know, because apparently there's some racism involved in all that. That's the name of the game nowadays, you know.
So who do we have speak on, because the police department will never come out and say this is controversial. It's not our place to give our opinion that, oh, this shooting doesn't look like things add up. Let's label it as controversial. So who gives that side of it if we determine that Act for SA and groups like that are off limits to media coverage?
I won't say they're off limits. I mean, to me, it's hilarious when I listen to them talk. You know, I'm not sure if it's Jade McCullough, the one that was complaining about more police presence at the libraries. Remember, they were asking for more police presence because they were having a lot of problems with the homeless. This was the library, personnel.
The downtown library?
Downtown library. And then Jade McCullough, someone asked her opinion. Well, some people might feel, and even Jalen McGee is saying that recently about more policing. It makes people feel uncomfortable. You know, so now we're back to square one. You want crime to stop, but the answer is not more policing. You know what I mean? Because they don't like the police. Because they know that there's going to be issues, justified issues come out of that. Use of force, shootings, things like that are going to come out of it. So that's why I'm saying, and I asked, I think it was Manny about this. Okay, if you want to entertain them, by all means. But they have no credibility. You know, Ananda Thomas, what's her background in police action?
Yeah,
besides bitch?
We can, like to our mutual, your point and ours, is that we've asked other people to come and join the podcast. And you've said you've gotten stuff from high-level people that have exited the police department in good standing, retired honorably, right? And they don't want to come forward. So, yeah, I don't have an answer for you for that. Like, I don't know if you could just walk up to a citizen and say, can we talk to you about this? They probably, maybe.
But first of all, who determines that it's controversial? You know what I mean? That's the first thing, that to be able to see that action and go, oh, you know, because to those people, everything is. You know, you about have to get shot as an officer first for you to be able to return fire. And they're still going to bitch about
in their eyes.
In their eyes. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And again, no one and no document says, as a police officer, you must first get shot.
Right.
You know, or get hit or get hurt. You know, we're still allowed, and I did it many times. If I feel like you're going to go hands-on or do something, I can strike first, regardless of what it looks like here, because I can articulate.
We're not paid to get
even certain things that the body cam won't pick up. You know, and that I've talked about this, you know, you can see people's heart beating through their shirts. You can see their carotid arteries. You can see twitches in their lips, little beads of sweat. They're already, you know, certain positions they take that people don't necessarily look for.
Yeah.
I don't like to get hit, you know, and I don't need to get hurt.
Right.
You know, stuff like that.
And I think you would agree too, right? I mean, at the end of the day, there is a very small percentage of people that are a part of our population, this community and others, whose intentions are never good.
Right.
They're just mean. They're evil. They're just going to do whatever they can do to harm people or take things from people because they can. That just happens, right? And there has to be people that go out there and arrest them, and they just happen to be police officers. You have anything for us?
Yeah, because you know, you're used to asking the questions.
No, I mean, I thought this was insightful. I've heard the criticism before on the type of coverage that we do. I am more than willing to take kind of a harsher look at administration and not necessarily just the rank and file. You know, people gripe about their bosses. That's kind of just how working in America is. But if
not
there's
you,
a legitimate,
right? He's not you.
But if there's a legitimate concern and something that isn't out there publicly that probably should be, I mean, I'm more than happy to be the one to expose it.
I think the hard thing is to get people to talk to you. When we had one of the mayoral candidates, Rolando Pablos, former Secretary of State for the state of Texas, and he says, well, yeah, I got the letter, but it just started to be a lot. And he says, and I said, yeah, there's two people. I think I told Melissa, I said, yeah, two people is two people. But going back to Pablo's, they said, "Hey man, anonymity." I said, "Well, I'm not anonymous. He's not anonymous. I'm telling you, this is happening, and it's happening, and it's happening. And it has for a very long time. And the worst of it, and I guess we can close with this if you're okay with this, Willie, is that City Hall and the bosses of the chief of our police department, they know what's happening, yet they do nothing. And so that means that they're a party to it, right? They're complicit in what's going on.
It's going to perpetuate.
Probably for the reasons that you outlined.
And what we're seeing too, and recently they just talked about the crime stats. They're low. There's if you read the comments on any social media, most
of the people are saying no way.
Yeah.
Because they don't feel it.
No, we saw the chief made a couple of swipes at the local media and said that, well, because our lead stories, the first grouping of stories is always violent crime. People have a unfair perception of, whether or not there is crime in San Antonio. And I mean, I'm a San Antonio resident. I grew up not locking my doors. I lock my doors at night. All of our neighbors have security
your wife,
camera
your
systems.
child are vulnerable too.
Yeah, so
There's been, I saw just a piece, and I was going to extend an invitation to every mayor or candidate, and they started with courage, right? He was on there, and they said, "What's your number one issue?" And he says, "Crime. Crime is our number one issue. Is my number one issue because that's what my constituents' number one issue is, right?" Pablo said the same thing. They're saying crime. Yesterday, y'all did a story, or the chief, somebody did a story, probably all of you, all the stations. Chief said crime is down 19%. Bullshit.
I don't believe that. And again, but he dictates the numbers, So in closing, Dillon, when you ask who do I go to for certain things, I would offer any one of us to explain certain things that maybe don't make sense, or even the ones to say, hey, to give our take on that. You know what I mean? Because that's how I would paint it, as a professional, whatever.
Because I think it would lend a lot more credibility when others that are kind of in the know hear that from you, to go, oh, well, okay, this is different. I'm not saying to say he did right. I'm just saying give that other side.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, talk to Ananda Thomas all y'all want.
It's been a while since I've reached out to her. I can't remember the last time.
They did it recently on Villarreal, Thomas Villarreal.
Oh, okay.
It was in that story. It wasn't you that wrote it, but that's what I would offer. I mean, we'll give you our numbers. If you don't, you don't.
No,
it's an offer.
The more the merrier. We've had to use a police expert from San Diego because no one, from SAPD that used to work there is willing to talk about these.
And don't rely, and I'm going to say this, and I hope whoever might be watching, if this dude is a professor in, some college or whatever in public safety, I don't know what it is, but unless that dude has been a cop for a while, he's got no credibility. I mean, he might know stats, but we always see that. Speaking of the expert out of, UTSA, and this dude, I was a cop for 6 years. What the hell did you do in 6 years? You know what I mean? I mean, you might have a little bit of understanding by someone that doesn't, but that's kind of what helps me working with these attorneys, because I did boots on the ground, for my whole career and stuff. Like I can articulate and explain that type of action. But anyway, we have kept you, and you have been. I've enjoyed this conversation.
Great conversation. Thank you for coming.
I did learn a lot, from your side, and I hope we can see each other again and talk about this. I would like to talk about what I mentioned to you, that a little bit more of what that case involving Thomas and Carlos was later. But I'm good, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you for spending some of your time with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet.
Have a great day.
All right.
Nice meeting you, sir. Thank you.